Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Microsoft Security Summit After Show. I'm Ryan McGee.
And I'm Jessica Feku. We're glad you're joining us today to break down last week's summit and get some unique perspective from some familiar faces.
Hopefully you were able to watch the digital event last week, and if you didn't, you can catch all of that content on demand. But what do you say we do a little recap, Jessica?
Let's do it, Ryan.
We started with an incredible conversation between the corporate vice president of Microsoft Security, Vasu Jakal, and our CEO, Satya Nadella. They had a really interesting discussion about the rapid pace of change in the security landscape and how it's never been more critical for us to come together as defenders and rise to the challenge.
And they talked about how technology alone won't be enough to stay ahead of cyber criminals. We need to leverage a combination of advanced technology, threat intelligence, and human expertise to get the job done.
That's right. And that led us into a fascinating panel discussion with threat researchers who shared their insight about recent nation-state attacks, ransomware trends, and the importance of leveraging AI and threat intelligence to ensure organizations are protecting themselves as much as they can.
And after that, we heard from Forrester analyst Jeff Pollard about how we're entering an era of managed extended detection and response, and that organizations are discovering they can greatly expand their security operations teams by partnering with managed service providers.
And that got us to a big announcement from Microsoft Security, the launch of Microsoft Security Experts, a new line of services that combines expert-trained technology with human-led services across security, compliance, identity, management, and privacy.
And we closed the Microsoft Security Summit with a great conversation about the future of cybersecurity with Vasu Jakal and two of Microsoft's top leaders in security, Charlie Bell and Tom Burt. Wow, we covered a lot of information at the summit last week, Ryan.
We did. And so we wanted to break down some of the key topics a bit more in this after show with help from a couple of thought leaders in the cybersecurity space. With us today in studio is Katie Nichols, who has worked on threat intelligence, network defense, and incident response for the U.S. Department of Defense. She's an instructor for the SANS Institute, and she's currently the Director of Intelligence for Red Canary, a managed detection and response provider. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Also here with us in studio is Chris Wysopal, an entrepreneur, computer security expert, and the co-founder and CTO of Veracode. Chris was a member of the high-profile hacker think tank, Loft, where he was a vulnerability researcher. Chris, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
All right, let's jump right in and talk about that threat intelligence panel discussion. We covered a lot of topics, from the Microsoft researchers who have access to those 24 trillion signals every day to get an idea of what cyber criminals are up to and help our customers harden their networks. And I'm really eager to hear your take on the value of threat intelligence. But first, let's watch a clip from that conversation.
I think this is a paradigm shift in how people think about threat intelligence, because threat intelligence being a 15-page PDF with a list of static indicators on the end of it is what everybody thinks they want and what they're buying. Whereas what we've done at Microsoft is to apply the same sort of tracking that we do at the nation-state level, which Ben can talk all about, to the cyber criminal economy as well. And so we're able to tell you about the infrastructure that we can fingerprint and not just tell you the domain. And then we're able to tell you about the behaviors that the actor is using.
We aggregate all these different techniques, and these are techniques that anybody can do with access to data like from RiskIQ. Using all the IPs, domains, identifying patterns. At the end of the day, these are humans at the other end of the keyboard, and they're repeating patterns over and over. Maybe they have an SOP or a playbook. I'm going to go register a domain this way today from this certain reseller. And these are techniques that we within Mystic and other companies capitalize on to identify hackers all over the place. And you can do it almost blindly, where you know one thing one time and you can exploit that piece of information to broadly gain visibility all across the internet.
So that was Jessica Payne and Ben Cole there talking about a paradigm shift that we have in threat intelligence today. Katie, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was so happy to hear Jessica talk about how threat intelligence is more than just the indicators at the end of this long PDF. From where I sit, I find a lot of people are confused about what threat intelligence even is. They think it's just a list of bad hashes or IPs, but the way I think about threat intelligence is just analyzed information about cyber threats that inform some kind of decision. And I love those thoughts from Jessica and Ben about those decisions might be things like prioritizing what you patch. Our adversary is exploiting this vulnerability. Chris has a ton of experience in vulnerability research, right? Or with a knowledge of, right, the adversary's playbook, like Ben talked about. One thing that my team has found is that that playbook is often so predictable. For example, we have crimeware families like QBOT and Iced ID that we know if we see those, followed by a certain reconnaissance commands and learning about the environment, followed by that dual-use tool, Cobalt Strike, ransomware is probably going to follow. And so that's what I think threat intelligence is all about, taking that knowledge about the cyber threats and applying them to help people make better security decisions, not just necessarily a feed of indicators. So Chris, I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, what really excites me is not just using threat intelligence for detection, but using it for defensive decision making. So moving it to protection, moving it to prevention. One of the earliest things I learned in the 90s was looking at attacks and learning from attacks and understanding how it worked and how you could defend against that attack. In the 90s, it was all manual. It was all slow. Today, with the scale of the attacks and the complexity of our systems, there's no way to do this without a lot of data and the deep analysis of that data. And so once you have that, now we can actually go back to maybe what we were doing in the 90s was fixing all the things that we saw being attacked, but now we can do it at scale with the complex environments that we have today.
And it's almost more necessary now to do, I think of what you just said as like, let's move from what just happened to me
Yep.
to let me think about how do I prevent that from happening again? And it's maybe more necessary now in this complex world.
And the important thing is like something that happened to someone else and you're using the same technology with the same configuration. You want to know that so that you can defend yourself based on an event that happened somewhere else.
As you were talking, that reminds me of, Ryan, what you were saying, right? Trying to be more proactive than reactive. And I think that's where a lot of organizations who are maturing that I've seen are going, right? Not just, we have an alert, respond to it, right? Put the fire out, but let's think proactively about, okay, how can we prevent these adversaries from getting in the first place, right? Securing our perimeters, that type of thing. So I think it's that shift, right? A little bit more proactive than reactive, perhaps.
There was a thread in that talk too about sort of basic hygiene. I'm not sure I love that term in security because it always feels like you should feel bad if you haven't done this stuff. But thinking about proactive, it makes me think of that because it's like you now have this new window or new way of looking at why basic hygiene or what basic hygiene, right?
Yeah, the basic hygiene, that is such a tough term. I agree. And what I always say about that is just because it's basic doesn't mean it's easy. These things that we as security professionals talk about, like making sure everything's patched. It's really easy for us to say in the comfort of this studio when we don't have to be in charge of a huge network and we're the single IT person. And so that's the thing that strikes me about the basic hygiene. It's basic, but it's not necessarily easy to implement. But what I've seen from a threat perspective, it can absolutely have huge benefits. If you look at the top exploited vulnerabilities, if you remediate and patch even a portion of those, significantly reduces your attack surface.
Yeah, I think hygiene has gotten to be almost a dirty word, if I can say that, because it's just a best practice. It's like it's the right thing to do. But once you have the threat intelligence, there's certain activities that are highly prioritized and almost near term, like you need to do this now. And it takes the limited resources you have, and you can't do all the hygiene you want to have. You can't patch all the systems. You can't change the configuration everywhere. You can't even add two-factor everywhere, although you should. See, look, I'm saying the basic hygiene thing. But you should have it on your VPN. So we learned this from particular events, and it focuses teams. And with limited resources, the threat intelligence can get you to use those teams the best way.
So in the same vein of proactive and reactive, I'm curious, like, what are you both hearing when it comes to your customers as it regards to threat intelligence? Do they understand the enormous amount of insight that's available to them today and what they can do with it?
I think teams are still learning about what they can do with threat intelligence. I think the space is evolving pretty quickly, and I think people do still think about it as indicators that they can add and block things, or they use it as something's gone wrong, let me go ask my threat intelligence provider to help me understand what went wrong. Very, very reactive. And I think what people need to learn today is that's not, you still need to do that, but you need to do so much more with threat intelligence.
Yeah, I think there's so much room for additional work, additional maturity and understanding of threat intelligence. And that's really my passion, is trying to spread that to the world. I do think that it's either people have this idea that threat intelligence is either a list of indicators or it's all about state-sponsored threats, the advanced persistent threats, which those both can be pieces of it, but that's not all of it. You know, we talk about strategic, operational, and tactical level intelligence. right? Intelligence can inform those SOC defenders who are trying to figure out which of these 11 billion alerts should I prioritize? Or it can inform leadership with, hey, should we do a deal with a new company in this part of the world? And so that's one thing I try to explain to people is there are different types of threat intelligence for different requirements and different needs.
Now, something that came up in that conversation with our researchers and in a presentation from Forrester analyst Jeff Pollard is the reality that many organizations simply don't have the expertise in-house or the people they need to analyze signals and do this work. So they're turning to managed service providers for help.
And obviously, there are a lot of ways that a provider can help. Threat hunting, investigation, response. But Jeff shared some really tangible research from Forrester about the value of partnering with a service provider. Let's take a look.
So we asked customers of MDR vendors, how much time does this vendor save you per activity in terms of hours? For things like performing root cause analysis, identifying suspicious and malicious activity, it was over 4 hours. Things like retrieving the artifacts, investigating, and executing response actions, it was over 3 hours saved. That's a day. That's one full workday of time that this was accelerated for the organizations that are working with MDR vendors.
Now, of course, saving time is an important outcome of working with a managed service provider, but the expertise that they can bring to an organization can really be a game changer. And so, Katie and Chris, I'd love to hear your take on the benefits of working with security service providers.
Yeah, I think one of the most rewarding things that I've heard from Red Canary customers is when they tell us that they feel like we're an extension of their team. That's exactly the goal. We want to be an ally for these organizations. We've had small organizations where the security person is the sheriff in a small local government, right? These are not organizations who have huge security operations centers. And I think that's where I often get the most excited to do this kind of work is in those small and medium-sized businesses, right? The schools, the universities, the local governments. And we've heard time and time again that having someone who can be an ally, a partner to come in and help you figure out what are the threats we're facing and then get rid of them. It has huge benefits and benefits in terms of reducing false positives that defenders are overwhelmed with. We've also found there's about a 10 times reduction in the mean time to respond, right? Our customers have found they can respond 10 times more quickly to the threats that they face on their networks. And time is everything, as we know, right? Minutes and hours can be the difference between getting ransomware or not.
Yeah, I just don't think there's enough security experts out there so that you can hire them yourself and have them on your team.
Right.
Small companies can't even have a single person. They might share a person, and larger companies might have a small team, but they can't scale to the size of their organizations and the number of threats today and the complexity of the infrastructure. I know at my company, Veracode, we do application security testing, and we used to just give our test results to the customer, but they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't have the expertise to do anything with it. And we ended up providing services to take just the technology and add a layer of humans that can work with the customer and work with the customer's business context and understand their needs. What are their risks? What are their priorities? So it's really, like Katie says, it's really an extension of the team that you couldn't really get any other way.
And it's for all of those reasons and more that Microsoft announced last week that we'll start offering managed security services for our customers with Microsoft security experts. We're not going to go deep into the details about those new services today. You can get all that information by watching the on-demand sessions from the Security Summit. But essentially, these new services are going to give our customers and our partners deeper access to the people here at Microsoft who are closest to the research so they can detect threats more accurately, speed up their response times, and keep their teams better informed.
Yeah, I know, Katie, the organization that you work for, Red Canary, was one of the design partners for Microsoft Security Experts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this new offering from Microsoft. And then, Chris, your thoughts too.
Yeah, I think Microsoft coming into the managed detection response, XDR, whatever you want to call it, this space just shows how much of a need there is for it, right? And so from my perspective, anyone who joins this space of MDR, XDR is a welcome partner. I think we are all in this together. And so I'm really excited to see the impact, right? As Chris said, there are not enough cybersecurity experts in this world. We have a problem with pipeline and bringing in new experts and building people up, and we need to work on that. But until we do, I think making better use of the people who are cybersecurity experts from Microsoft, from Red Canary, from Veracode, from everywhere in this community. And so I'm just excited to continue partnering with Microsoft and continue bringing these services to more and more organizations who really need them, where a cyber attack can make a difference between them going out of business or not. Those are the stakes here.
Yeah, one of the things I see when you work with a service provider is your team gets better. They learn. They might be good at endpoint, but they don't know about identity. They don't know about email. They don't know about cloud environments, and they can learn that by working with experts that have more breadth of expertise, and it builds up your team.
Yeah, now, before we move on, I think it's important to mention how important Microsoft partners will be as we roll out Microsoft Security Experts. The reality is, as Katie just said, a single vendor can't meet the unique requirements of every organization, and that's why we're making investments in our whole security partner ecosystem so they can tap into these services for their customers. We'll be talking a lot more about these investments and the role our partners will play at Microsoft Inspire coming up in July.
All right, the last segment from the Security Summit we wanted to discuss with the two of you today is a conversation Vasu Jakal had with Charlie Bell, who leads Security Compliance and Identity Management Organization here at Microsoft, and Tom Burt, our Corporate Vice President of Customer Security and Trust.
They covered a lot of topics about the future of cybersecurity and how we need to use the full force of technology to fight cyber criminals. AI, machine learning, and the importance of the cloud to help harden networks with telemetry, quick patches, and updates. Here's a clip from that conversation about the importance of the cloud in securing the future. This is Tom Burt talking about some of the work Microsoft is doing to help with the cyber warfare going on in Ukraine.
Where we're feeding threat intelligence to Ukrainian cybersecurity officials so that they can go protect government agencies, critical infrastructure, all of those are under attack. And when we can, we provide that notification information directly to the affected enterprise or organization. But in most cases, the most efficient way to do that is to pass it through these cybersecurity officials. But there's a big exception. In the instances where we have cloud customers in Ukraine who've been under attack, our ability to help them and help them respond really rapidly is so much faster. And the other thing we've learned is when we reach out to them and say, you're under attack, here's some threat intelligence for you to go hunt and find the bad actor, they already know from the security services we provide, they already know they're under attack.
Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I love security in the cloud because the infrastructure is automated, you have more visibility, and the other thing I like is your cloud provider helps you defend some of it. Instead of building an API yourself, you're using your cloud provider's API, they're going to be defending that part of your infrastructure. But infrastructure as code allows you to very rapidly change your infrastructure, change the configuration, add new protection. And it's that speed and precision and completeness that the cloud can give you that's really a game changer for defense.
Yeah, slightly different perspective. As the threat person, I'm always worried about how adversaries are shifting to what defenders are doing. And so one of my concerns with cloud, and I agree with all the comments about its convenience in terms of pushing out new code, new infrastructure, I worry a little bit about the change in monitoring and the change in kind of responsibility for monitoring and responding to incidents. There are a lot of different as a service, infrastructure, platform, and I found sometimes in talking to people who are using a lot of cloud infrastructure, they're not really sure if something happens, are they supposed to respond? Is the cloud provider supposed to respond? And so as someone who's watching a lot of these advanced threats like Nobelium, one group that Microsoft has been tracking, a lot of others have tracked as well, they do a lot of actions in the cloud. And so I think a lot of benefits there, but as a community, maybe we need to do a better job of explaining to people the trade-offs and the risks and making sure that as you're standing up cloud infrastructure, you're logging it, right? You have visibility that if an adversary were to get into that environment, okay, how would you know that? And then who would respond? Is it the cloud provider? Is it you? Because what we found is adversaries often take advantage of anything they see in defensive environments or in approaches, any gaps or any cracks that they can wiggle through. That's how they're going to kind of conduct their operations. So I think a lot of benefit from cloud, but as a threat person, I'm a little cautious of anything like this.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance between this, you don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about it, of course. Yeah. And the idea that you can do infrastructure as code, and whether it's on the cloud provider to make these updates and changes and roll out a patch, or whether it's on you, needs to be super, super clear, because people do get that confused. But then once you have that clarity, then you've got a really, an obvious way to address some of these issues, and a way for you to do it really, really rapidly. And the who does it becomes less important as long as you know, right?
To underscore the comments earlier about the speed of response and helping victims in Ukraine, that's pretty cool. That Microsoft's able to so quickly notify and help those on the ground who are dealing with real life cyber warfare respond so quickly to a barrage of attacks there.
And this is a little bit of a new space, I guess. That came up in that conversation too, where the idea of physical conflict now bleeding over into the cyberspace. Always been something that we've talked about. Now it's reality for the first time, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, we're really seeing cyber war happening. On the first days of the Russian attack, they knocked out the satellite system that a lot of Ukraine was dependent on to communicate. And without communications, how do you target things? How do you move different resources around? That was right away. But on the other hand, some of the attacks seem to be falling flat. There's reports that they haven't been able to take out the power infrastructure like they did, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, and that's being able to be defended. So it's not like they're obviously going to be able to have their attacks succeed. I recently saw that the Russians started attacking some of the power infrastructure with missiles. And I wondered if that was because the cyber attacks failed, because that's obviously what you would want to do. So we're going to see this blend, this mixing of physical and cyber in the future.
Yeah, sort of flipping back and forth, really fascinating.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to the team at Microsoft. I think it was the Digital Crime Unit, some Mystic, the threat intelligence folks as well, put out an awesome report talking about kind of the nature of cyber attacks in Ukraine. And some interesting takeaways there, to your point, Chris, was that yes, there have been some attacks, but there's been actually a lot of success in responding to those, stopping them before they got too far. And one of the assessments in that report was that, there are tactical outcomes, but it remains to be seen if that has really contributed to Russia's strategic objectives, right? Have these cyber attacks really made an impact? And it's something that I think researchers are going to continue watching, but I don't think we know yet, right? This is still a very new area of cyber war, and what do these combined arms, so to speak, look like?
Yeah, so in those deliveries of attack, when you think about the coordinated efforts, it actually brings us back to the conversation that Vasu and Tom and Charlie were having about the capabilities of the cyber criminals today and how some of them are super organized, even so as to have HR departments and employees of the month. Vasu asked Charlie and Tom about some of the kinds of skills that we think defenders are going to need going forward.
Right, and Charlie talked about leveraging data science and AI to tackle this problem, developing automated models and teams, making security teams better able to understand and respond to these attacks. And he brought up intelligence analysts who can help take data and help us learn more about the cyber criminals and what their goals might be. I'm curious what you both think about what the critical skills defenders will need in today and in the future.
Yeah, I think that defenders just need to be more nimble. I think a lot of defenders are used to looking at static lists of the top 20, security controls and implementing those. And it's been very, very static. And the idea that threat intelligence can feed into how do you prioritize cyber hygiene, I think is a fairly new idea. So defenders are going to have to look at these different information sources and use them sort of in real time. Like, what am I doing today? Or what am I doing next week? So the field has got to get more nimble.
Chris, I would love to bring in a point I think Vasu made earlier on how we can be a little more nimble and creative. I think it's diversity. I think it's diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, people who were system administrators, who were from a liberal arts background or an arts background, right? People who can bring in different ways of thinking. And so I think that's going to be key. I agree with your being more nimble and a little more creative, not just trying the same thing over and over. But I would also add another key skill I think we often overlook is communication. This is for intelligence analysts who are trying to communicate about threats, really complex threats in a really complex landscape, right? The ability to distill a lot of information simply, communicate that. not just threat intel analysts, but incident responders trying to communicate up to leadership about the impact of an incident. I think both written and verbal communication is something that, right, we need to start to prioritize. It's not just the quote technical skill set, the coding, you got to have that, but I think well-rounded cybersecurity professionals also have really strong communication skills.
Yes, these soft skills, as they say, right?
I like to call them core skills rather
yeah,
than
I like
soft.
that.
There's nothing soft about being able to speak and write well, right?
It warms my heart. As the journalism major in the room today, glad to hear it. There's one more soundbite from the Security Summit that I want to play for you that really stood out for me. Vasu asked both Tom and Charlie what they're most hopeful about when it comes to cybersecurity, and I loved Charlie's answer.
I'm actually very optimistic. I think people talk about this notion of attacker asymmetry, that the attacker gets to come at you from any angle, sees the entire landscape, and you have to defend everything. But I think one of the things the attacker is at a disadvantage in is the attacker doesn't own the rules of the game. We set the rules of the game when we build things. We create the environment. Because we create the environment, especially as we move to the cloud. I mean, infrastructure is code. I mean, there's so many things that we can do to set the environment up so that we change this game from, the analogy I use is imagine, a game like basketball where you score triple digits as you run up and down the court. The bad guys are having a field day. Well, you change it into a soccer game where the field's 20 miles long and the goal is 2 feet wide, and it's become very, very hard to score. The game is going to be 0-0 many times. Once in a while, there will be a score, and that's where we're going, I think.
I love that analogy. So I'm going to turn this question to both of you. What makes you hopeful or optimistic for the future?
I think it's that we as defenders and as this community, we are catching these adversaries. We are catching threats every single day and stopping them and helping organizations continue whatever their mission is. And it's sometimes overwhelming when there's a sea of reporting about the newest malware and these newest techniques adversaries are using to lose sight of the fact that we are often succeeding. Right? And there's this other kind of rule of thumb that, well, an adversary has to be right, only once to get in, and a defender has to be right every time. Well, as Charlie just commented there, right, we own the environment. If an adversary is hopping around your network, you have lots of chances to try to catch them. And so I think there are lots of reasons to be optimistic, especially in the work every day that Microsoft, that Veracode, that Red Canary, that all these organizations are doing. We are catching these threats and making a difference.
So I'm going to use another war analogy here. And as technology changes, you can change from offensive dominance to defensive dominance. We're actually seeing this happen in Ukraine with some of the technologies now, like these shoulder-mounted missiles and drones. It's changing into more defensive dominance over the old World War II style offensive dominance that Russia has. And I think we're seeing technology change right now that is changing in the defender's favor. I think the cloud environments, if used correctly and we can get straight who's defending what, is a game changer when it comes to defense, with rapidly being able to change infrastructure to defend things. And also the threat intelligence, massive amounts of threat intelligence and the data science and ML that can make sense of that is another game changer in the defender's pocket. So I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to change us to a more defensive posture in the future.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, your optimism and enthusiasm warms my heart, and I'm really thankful for both of you today for joining us and sharing your insight and perspective. We think it's so important to have these conversations, and we'll continue to work and grow with the network of defenders as we continue to move forward.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both for your time today and for being with us on this whole journey.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be here.
Thanks, it's a pleasure.
We hope this has been an interesting conversation for you watching. For more details about the topics we covered today, be sure to check out the on-demand content from last week's Security Summit.
That's right. You can check out the full key segment you saw some clips from today in 12 deep dive sessions covering 4 specific categories: security, compliance, identity, and threat intelligence.
And we have another great way to get even more out of all that content. Microsoft subject matter experts will be going even deeper into each of the sessions from last week's summit. For 3 weeks, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, customers can join a community of their peers to ask questions about the latest security product innovations from Microsoft Security.
This is a great opportunity to keep doing the work we've talked about today. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks at the RSA conference in San Francisco. Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.